This sounds really neat, but is it really a good idea? And the answer is that it depends.
Welcome everyone. My name is Kim Larson. I'm a Client Success Manager here at Luminoso. And today I'm joined once again by Rob Pascale of Marketing Analysts, formerly MAi Research. Say hi, Rob.
Formerly MAi Research and now Marketing Analysts.
And for today's webinar, we're going to be doing something a little bit different than we've done in the past, because it's going to be less about us and what we do and more about the changes that are happening around us as researchers invested in text AI. Our goal today is for you and our audience to leave this webinar understanding how to use ChatGPT to bolster your research. So let's start by playing a bit so we can get an idea of what these generative AIs are doing. Welcome everyone to my Portland Dream Bar Pub Cider House. Some of you know that I recently tried to do my taxes in a more fun way this year by leaving the house, doing it somewhere different. I did get my taxes done, but like many folks may relate, my mind wandered a bit throughout the process, and this was the result of my mind wandering. Image courtesy of the DALL-E generation. DALL-E uses the same framework as ChatGPT, and this vision was a good start. I feel like I could enjoy spending a few hours here with my dogs and my laptop, but I wanted a bit more of a backstory. I wanted to really imagine what my dream cider house might entail. So as the visionary for this bar/cider house, I went to ChatGPT as I started brainstorming. To start, I wanted it to be dog friendly. I wanted it to be cozy and cute. I wanted it to be Hobbit themed. And I wanted to make sure it included my strong preference for Marionberry. And as I prepped for this webinar with Rob, I bounced this idea of a Hobbit cider house off of him. Rob thankfully validated what my and many people's first impressions were when using ChatGPT for the first time. So I did want to recognize that using ChatGPT really expedited the brainstorming process and added some really helpful ideas. It was fun to use, it was easy to read, and it feels smart. And it came up with things that I really couldn't have done on my own. But I did start to feel a bit nervous, like what would it do to the research industry? Where does it fit? And Rob pointed out where it started to get hung up was in the details.
And so you need some specifics like logos, messaging for ads, vendors, relationships, employees, who's the target market, the flavor profiles you need to make sure you have available. And these are the sorts of specifics that ChatGPT just can't answer. One idea that came about during this process, which kind of just shows you how the brainstorming can work with this type of thing, is, and the creative nature of it really, is that by including it in your workflow, we are able to actually find that this idea of a cider brewing as a service came up. And so the idea behind that from going back and forth with ChatGPT together, we found that customers could come in, get help creating a flavor profile based on other drinks that they like, and the cider house could help create this custom cider for them, and they could pick it up in about a week or two. So we were thinking, okay, well, this sounds really neat, but is it really a good idea? And the answer is that it depends. It depends on whether there's actually a market for it. It depends on whether the reality of humans are going to use the service. And so asking ChatGPT will provide an answer to this question, but it will just make something up. It will be ambiguous, which shows kind of a level of responsibility from OpenAI's perspective, but it's still not a substitute for live data. And it's the data that you need to be able to make those types of decisions. So, I want to go back now to the cider concept again with fresh eyes. Going back to this original image, it provides a great feel for what this place would be like for you. If you're asking it questions that are going to need details or you're going to take some execution on those details, you really need to get to something more specific in terms of the questions and the information that are going to come back to those specifics. So for instance, let's look at the details of this cider house. This, like you said, was made with DALL-E, which is another service created on the OpenAI platform. And just in the same way that ChatGPT generates text based on prompts, DALL-E generates images based on prompts. But there's no reasoning going on behind the scenes. So at first glance, this is a great place to start for the visionary of an idea, like how you got excited about the cider house. But like any business, the details need to be fleshed out to execute on the idea and allocate your limited resources with intention and reason. And the questions about specifics are ones that an AI just can't make up answers for. You really need to ask the market. Let's look at a couple of areas of this photo real quick, just because this exemplifies this. If you look at the beer mug, you may or may not have noticed when we first showed this image that there's something off about it, but once you focus on it, it just gives you the feeling of it being a beer mug.
Yeah, so if we're going to tie this back into like a business objective that's using a generative AI, this could be the like text answer equivalent of asking the OpenAI how to manage your customer support services. If you ask something at a high level, but then you start to look for something specific, it's going to be kind of extra fuzzy. Let's look at some other details. Like, did anyone notice the stools? It has the idea of seating, but it's a bit of a fuzzy idea. There could be good takeaways here. Like the teal seat looks nice with that like wood stain, but it did not get the architecture of the seat correct. So if you were to deliver this insight to someone who is more execution minded, I'm looking for the top 5 things I need to do next, this would not be a good directive.
Yeah, you would never send this over to a carpenter and have him build this for you, for instance. So let's actually go back to the research information cycle.
Yeah, so this is the research cycle. If you've watched our past webinars, you're familiar with it. Leadership is the supply generation. So if you are in HR, you are ensuring the culture of the company is good. If you are a manufacturer and you're producing quality goods, you want to make sure that you're producing things that are meeting the market demand. And when you work with a researcher, you tell them what you're trying to accomplish. And then the researcher can take that initiative or those objectives, turn it into questions, source storyful, meaningful data, take it to the market provides their feedback. The feedback is then collected. Hopefully they're asking everyone and taking sufficient sample sizes, which then the researcher converts into insights to provide back to the leadership. So, but with the introduction of ChatGPT, one of the things that we've been hearing about is the temptation to use OpenAI as a substitute or a replacement for that research cycle. I understand the temptation. As Rob alluded to earlier, OpenAI is generating text feedback, but it is ultimately not the buyer. So it can project, but it's unless you ask the people involved, you're not going to get a really crisp picture of what the needs are. Kind of like treating OpenAI or ChatGPT as like a crystal ball. So
yeah, and so we recognize that this is a really great tool, though, like I've said a number of times already. So we started to think about how we could use this most effectively in this research cycle. And there's actually a number of areas where we can. So instead of replacing the entire truth-driven engine at the core of the research cycle, we want to incorporate the technology to enhance what we do at each of these different stages.
Yeah, and some of you in the audience work with small teams, some of you work in really large teams, and some of you work independently. When you work in a large team, you get the benefit of sounding ideas off of others in the team. I get to benefit from bouncing ideas off of Rob for my cider house, and that can be really helpful. But if you're working in isolation or if you're working in small groups, that echo chamber effect and that creativity is a little bit tampered. So having a thing to reiterate or rephrase the things that you're saying can be groundbreaking. Next, we'll go through 3 ways that ChatGPT can help enhance the communication steps that the researcher is involved with, and why we use natural language understanding to elevate the voice of the market. So let's start with the first step, the communication of objectives. So we want to make sure that we are surfacing that researchers and leaders, they both benefit from having objectives first communication over direction-centric communication. So these aren't exclusive, but we want to make sure that we are having objectives first so that we know what we are doing to make sure the directions are correct and aligned with the needs. So we want to step away from what you want specifically and more towards why do you want it, at least up front. So the benefits of having clear objectives mean that the whole problem is addressed and you're not getting partial or incomplete solutions. We've talked about that in prior webinars, because incomplete solutions aren't necessarily solutions. So what is the purpose of my dream cider house? I don't know yet, but I liked having these options laid out for me.
Yeah, and that's actually why the part of why this tool is so powerful is it's a lot easier to react to ideas. And when you react to ideas, you start thinking of your own takes on those ideas and injecting yourself into it. And it's a lot easier to add on to someone else's idea or any other idea than generating one entirely from scratch. But if you can come up with this semblance of an idea, feed it into like a tool like ChatGPT, and you start to get some bouncing back and forth of ideas where you iterate on it a little bit, you can end up in really a very different place than you would have all alone.
Yeah, and at the end there, I did appreciate that ChatGPT's answer passed the onus of the decision back on to me, because how success is defined is not something that can be defined via projection, right? That's kind of like having the ChatGPT decide, like run the company. It doesn't necessarily make sense. It's the leadership that has to decide what the priorities are. And what do we personally care about as researchers is often the integrity of the data and improving people's lives. So we want to be surfacing the truth. We want to be advocating for improvements that are meaningful, because ultimately that's what is going to matter. So once we're clear on the objectives, having communicated with the leaders, we want to move on to the questions, the next steps. How do we communicate with the market?
It's important to know that we're not going to lean on ChatGPT to design the survey. We're just going to be using it in this case for generating some types of stimulus, like names, some good ideas for names. And in this case, it even tells you why it chose certain names, which is pretty neat. And it just kind of makes sure that we're covering our bases. And you might use this when you're creating new ideas or names or claims, using it as part of a brainstorming session with other people and treating it as another member of the team in a sense. And then the other thing is we're not asking it to analyze any of this data. Once we get through figuring out what are all the questions that we want to ask and making sure we're covering all our bases, then we're going to go and collect that data, get that feedback like we talked about, and then we're going to analyze it without any kind of ChatGPT system, because it is not going to be able to give you those types of specifics. So
Yeah.
that's the part that we get to do when we have real data.
So in this example, we have ChatGPT coming up with 10 starter survey questions. Some of it's binary, some of it is kind of list oriented, but it covers some of those important topics, like what are the desired objectives, the importance elements, the atmosphere. It touches on some things that if I was sitting alone or in a small team, a colleague or coworker might have come up with. So this kind of offsets the pressure of trying to figure everything out on your own. So yes, once you have the data, marketing analysts can turn it into actual insights.
Yeah. So in this case, we didn't actually go and collect this data. We made this up, but let's pretend like it's real. And so in this case, we actually find in the top left, this is the way we would show a turf analysis. And so we can identify 4 specific flavors that tap into 70% of that Portland market that Kim is going for in the cider house. And then we can look on the right-hand side and we can see among this target the name preferences. And so the one that clearly won out in that case was Orchard's End. And then the bottom left was some of how we processed the open-ended information with how people think and feel about other cider house experiences based on some open-ended questioning. And then once we have all that information, then we can put it into action, because now we've got all the information, we've digested it, we figured out what are the core insights that are most important to the business, and feed it back into putting it into action.
Yeah, so in my dream cider house, the action part of this would be someone financed the bar of my dreams, also known as like advocating for my findings, right? I've done the research, I have this vision, and now I need something to be done with it. We hate it when research is done and it goes in the duly noted pile. I've done the research and I'm going to do what I want anyway. We want to make sure that what we're saying is compelling. So, and I'll also
come up with a really great letter here. This is phenomenal. And what we did was we actually fed it in that the information I just mentioned about 70% of the market being covered by those flavors, and it incorporated all of that information and did it in a way that was going to be compelling and persuasive to potential investors.
Yeah, and having worked with a variety of market researchers at various parts of their career and with different strengths and backgrounds, there's a lot of folks who go into research, and some folks are very data-minded, spreadsheet-minded, but they struggle with the retelling of that data because they live by the spreadsheets. And there's other folks who are very storytelling-minded. They were looking for the anecdote, and those will often drive the decisions. And by pairing daylight and natural language understanding with the text generation, it levels the playing field a bit. Because if you are the data-minded person, this can help generate a story that may have otherwise been difficult to conjure up on your own. You can still go in and edit it to make sure that it's comprehensive and accurate once provided the accurate data, but you also want to make sure that you're telling the truth from the start.
Right.
So with that, are we ready for a summary?
I think so.
I think so. We want to make sure that we are using OpenAI and chat generation, text generation appropriately, which is in the communication rephrasing steps. And we don't want to rephrase what the external stakeholders or what the market is saying. So we want to make sure that we're using a language understanding to surface the language of the consumer and not speaking over the language of the consumer. So any details I missed there, Rob?
No, I think that's just about it. We want to make sure that we're using the tools that we have available to us at all times, and just making sure we don't overstep what they're capable of.
Sounds good. So thank you all for attending. Luminoso is a natural language understanding AI that surfaces the truth of the text, and we work with researchers and analysts to produce meaningful insights quickly. So if you need to understand your audience, don't hesitate to let us know. We're happy to help in any way, the same way we help Rob.
Yeah, and at Marketing Analysts, we focus on bringing the latest tools and AI techniques to our clients to help them gain deeper understanding of their data. And we do this primarily on quantitative space across everything from very basic concept tests and product tests all the way through to very heavy advanced analytics and text science and things like that, where we use Luminoso.
Yeah, so if you have any questions about ChatGPT or how it can and should help your research needs, don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. We're happy to connect. And if you like the idea of brew as a service, share this with your local brewery places, or finance make it happen. I will go to your Hobbit themed cider house to do my taxes, specifically in Portland. So with that, that concludes our webinar, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everyone.